Let's go.
Welcome to the Soul Fam podcast, where we expand your personal universe. I'm Diana Marquetta, and in each episode, Soul Fam co-founder, co-creator Lexi Strummer-Solden and I interview the world's most rising and longtime experts in consciousness, spirituality, entertainment, healing, and science. From Earth's dimensions and dimensions way, way beyond. On the Soul Fam podcast, our frequencies are high and your heart chakras will open as these powerful voices of today share cutting-edge research, profound experiences, and valuable knowledge for your world in this out-of-this-world, thought-provoking, envelope-pushing interviews that could only take place right here on the Soul Fam podcast. Welcome to the Soul Fam podcast with Diana and Lexi. On this week's episode, William Kiesel is our guest. William is the publishing director of Ouroboros Press, and his accomplishments are so thick I actually have to read this. An antiquarian bookseller and faculty at 22 Teachings School of Hermetic, Science, and Magical Arts here in Los Angeles, one of the leading schools, mystery schools in Los Angeles, where he teaches, you tell me, William, alchemical and ceremonial magic, and you have decades of experience in Hermetic Qabalah magic and esoteric symbol systems. William assists seekers on the path to self-knowledge, which is what we are all about, in understanding the mysteries of the ageless wisdom. Welcome, William. I hope that we can roll out the red carpet for you because your accomplishments are so vast.
Thanks for having me, you guys. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. This is, William, you are my teacher and my grand teacher, right? Which is what Naha calls you for many of us, because Naha Amadi, who was my first teacher in the Western mystery tradition, is actually a former student of yours, a current colleague at 22 Teachings, and you've even published a book together, or she wrote an intro for an English translation of a tarot book.
Yeah, the Monde Primitif was originally a French encyclopedia from the 18th century, and it contained the very first essays on the tarot as being used as a divinatory tool. And if you read any history books about the tarot, that those texts are mentioned, but there wasn't an English translation of that. So we arranged to have that translated, and Naha wrote the introduction. And so I co-published that with the school. And yeah, just really happy to have that out in the world finally for English-speaking readers.
Yeah, and sorry to spring that question on you. I wanted to add it, but then I also wanted to find my signed copy of the book, which is signed by you and Naha, obviously not the original author from 500 years ago. But I was going to ask what it is you do at Ouroboros Press, because I've bought some rare and used books from you before that are pretty exciting. And so I brought a couple of them. Let's see. The first is this beautiful Thought Forums book by Annie Besant. And then this has become one of my most prized possessions ever. Okay. This is, what is it? F. Marion Crawford.
Hard to see it.
It's Zoroaster's. It's F. Marion.
Oh, you bought that book on Zoroaster.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to come by books on Zoroastrianism.
But yet you have them.
Yeah. Well, I've been an antiquarian bookseller as well as a publisher. So I've been publishing for 22 years, and I focus on Western esoteric material, primarily source texts. So books that are referred to when you're reading the history of alchemy or the history of Hermeticism. These are books that come up when you're reading the history. And I got into it because I was researching and these books were unavailable. So I started doing research in archives and libraries and different institutions and pulling these out of obscurity. But I've also been an antiquarian bookseller for over 30 years. So I've worked in used books and antiquarian books and specialize in the esoteric field as well. So those two examples that you showed were books that I sold in that capacity. I didn't publish either of those, but I try to, through the publishing, make books available that I've either had translated or, just reprinted. But then also, I always keep my eye out for important esoteric material that's out of print or hard to find, or even new books like that. That's a new edition of the thought forms that you showed there. And they did such a great job. I think Sacred Bones published that. They did such a great job of reprinting that I thought it would be a great one to stock. So yeah, I'm really am a book person, always have been. And I like to get those materials to people and help people find what they're looking for. Because a lot of times there's so many different ways you can approach the esoteric world, and it can be overwhelming. So I've had the pleasure working in the book field for so long of kind of knowing the playground, if you will. And so I can kind of help direct people to what it is that they're looking for, or at least give them some hints, because it's always going to fall upon the individual to discover what path is right for them.
So you were always a book person. So being in this line of work, it wasn't a huge surprise for you to find yourself here.
Yeah, I've always been a book person. My family were readers, and I found out about being able to trade books at used bookstores quite young. And when I was old enough to go to bookstores on my own, as a teenager, I had a lot of books that had been handed down to me through my family. And so I took them around to all the different bookstores and got trade credit. So I was able to start collecting esoteric books when I was a teenager. And by the time I got out of high school, I already had quite a nice esoteric research library.
Was there a book or author that initially sort of pulled you into the esoteric world? Was there one book that was like crackling with energy that you picked up and you opened it and, the heavens shone down and that kind of thing?
Well, I was really just fascinated by books in general. A really early influence would be Manly Palmer Hall. His earlier publications were also beautifully produced. So Manly Hall not only published in a very wide variety of esoteric subjects, he was very accessible in terms of communicating those things to new readers, new seekers. But he also made really beautiful books. He was a book collector himself, and so when he started producing books, he would make them be beautiful objects. And so I can show you one that is an early influence. This is an early Manly Palmer Hall book. It's called Codex Rosicrucis, and it's a Rosicrucian manuscript that he reproduces and then also has translated. So there's the original manuscript is in red, and then the black is translated. So, but you can see this is quite a nice tome, and this was before he had the Philosophical Research Society. So this one was published 1938 and under the imprint of the Philosopher's Press. So Manly was really kind of an early influence for me in that regard.
Is this the group that's located in Ojai, Lexi?
I think they're on Los Feliz here in LA, right?
Oh, okay.
The Philosophical Research Society. Yeah, I've seen some of Manly's book collection, whatever is available to the public, and it's pretty amazing. This person did have an incredible book collection. It's definitely sort of goals to aspire to.
He wrote one of the most influential 20th century books in the esoteric field in terms of like, people think of him as a popularizer for the occult because he wrote a huge book called The Secret Teachings of All Ages. And it breaks down all the different branches of the esoteric world, the Western esoteric world. So there's chapters on Freemasonry, there's chapters on Theosophy, Alchemy, Qabalah, Hermeticism, Druidism, all different subjects. And it's a lavishly illustrated book referred to as an elephant folio because it's quite large. It's like 20 inches high. It's like 16 by 20 inches. Toshin just did a reprint of it last year, or maybe 2 years ago. That's just beautiful.
There's a lot of information in that book, but it's by no means going to solve things for you or find the answer for you, even though it is a book for seekers with a lot of information that's maybe more accessible than it would have been. It's still a really dense read. And you start out and you get a couple pages in, you're like, oh, it all makes sense. Yes, I'm getting closer. And then a few more pages, you're like, what? You have that moment where your brain explodes. And then you read down to the footnotes, and then it's directing you to all of these other source materials. As you mentioned, you're like, well, I've got to get my hands on the source materials and the ones before that and before that. And it just sort of it's incredible, but it's not an easy read necessarily. It's dense and it covers a lot. But as somebody who is maybe, 4 or 5 years into it, I am still very overwhelmed by The Secret Teaching of All Ages.
It's a big book. He's summarizing all the different branches of esotericism. So it's not a bad book to investigate if you're new to these things and want to just get a sense of what each of the branches of occultism are about. Because, you can't really do it all right away, right? It takes time. And so kind of having a sense of what direction you want to take, it's a good one for that.
Was that your first book, the first occult book?
No, what was my first book? I think my first book was actually on witchcraft. And that was because when I was a young boy, my mother had a friend who was a witch. And we were visiting her home, and I was playing with her dog. And I noticed that she had some interesting looking books on her shelf. And so I was looking at her books and pulled one off on magical herbalism. And I remembered thinking to myself as I was reading it, and there were passages in there about how magic was real. And I was having this thought as a young boy. I was like, magic is real? And right as I was having this thought, the woman saw what I was reading, and she goes, "Oh, an interest so young, the spirits must favor you." Mm. And this is a woman who changed my diapers, was a friend of the family. So the impact of that statement was pretty intense on me. And so then I was fascinated. And, it was several years later before I was able to sort of really start delving into what the esoteric world was about. And I was really fortunate to run into a person who became my friend and mentor. And he really helped give me direction, in investigating things and trying to figure out, well, what's your real interest in the esoteric world and how can you approach it? So I was really fortunate in that way.
Just because we've done a few interviews, Lexi, kind of in the witch world, I would be curious what you both feel the definition or explanation of the occult is, because I feel like how the media or how it's generally portrayed may not be what the actual intention or understanding really is.
William, take it away.
Sure. Well, occult, it comes from the Latin occultum, which means hidden. And what we're referring to here, you've heard me use the term esoteric. And I prefer the word esoteric because it's a little more general and it doesn't quite have that the stigma that's been attached to the word occult because of the media, the movies, dogmas, religious dogma, and what have you. But when we're talking about hidden, it's because we're not seeing it with our outward eyes. And the word esoteric actually means inner, as opposed to exoteric, which is the surface of things. So what we're trying to do with the hidden things is see beyond the surface and get to the esoteric or the inner meaning of things. So the inner meaning of life and the inner meaning of the mysteries of life. So for me, the occultism really is about penetrating beyond the surface of things and trying to get at what the source to life is really about.
It's fascinating. The books that you've shown they feel like magical mystery books that you sort of as a kid use, and even now, I mean, there's part of me that's always a kid that's super curious about what those pages hold within them and what sort of mysteries and powers unfold from them.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think this is one of the reasons why books are so fascinating, right? Because when we're reading a book, we kind of are going inside ourselves a little bit, right? We're receiving information from somewhere else, and it's taking us outside of ourselves a little bit, but at the same time we're observing it, and that's affecting our perception, which is how we experience reality, right? Through our perception. And the thing is that our perception can be affected by all kinds of things, right? We hear things on the news, our friends tell us things, our parents tell us things, we have experiences, and all these things affect our perception. But what a lot of people don't realize is that we're able to affect our perception ourselves. And that's part of what the occult is about, is being able to be the ones that affect our perception as opposed to letting outside forces affect our perception. And language, writing and language is one of the most firm ways that we do that, because language is how we direct consciousness. Letters and words are forms, and that's how we articulate our thoughts, our feelings. And so when we use these forms, these shapes, they mold our consciousness into these concepts, and that's how language works.
Love that. It's very
I was just going to say, they help us, those of us with busy minds, the symbols and thought forms, can that help us overwrite some of the noise and maybe unhealthy patterns that we may have come into the world with? Or how does it work internally with the symbols? Because with the esoteric books, it's not only language, but there's symbols and sigils and things that are visual, usually, not all the time, and they're accessing parts of you that, I don't know, from what I understand, that logical, busy brain, that chattery brain is sort of being bypassed there. So in addition to books in general having that power over us with the forms of the words and the language and the letters, the additional layer in the esoteric world is the symbols and the sigils.
It's true. It's true. Symbols are really the thing that drew me into the esoteric world. I love the mysterious aspect that these sorts of studies imply with those symbols. And it's just important for us to remember that, again, even in the case of symbols or images, these are just a type of language. They're tools. Symbols, the alphabet is a set of symbols. Letters are symbols. It's just we use them so often that we take it for granted. We speak all the time. Sometimes we don't even think about what it is that we're saying. Sometimes we don't even realize when we're reading things what we're reading, but it's still directing our consciousness, because symbols are forms, they're shapes. And these shapes, it doesn't even matter if we understand fully, because shapes have particular boundaries, right? A circle only has round sides. It doesn't have sharp edges like a triangle might. Triangles have points. So you can't really roll a triangle. The shape doesn't allow that. And the same is true with our letters. The different letters have sounds, they have shapes, and they direct our consciousness so that we can get their bridges of understanding. They allow us the opportunity to communicate. And symbols are the same way. And a lot of us today sort of have a little easier time understanding this because of Carl Jung, who talked about archetypes, right? Everybody sort of understands what archetypal imagery is. And it's really true for symbols as well. Color, for example, colors are things. They don't represent things. Red is a warm color because it is a warm color. It doesn't represent warmth. Blue is a cool color because it has a cooling quality to it. We see the same thing in music, or the tones of our voice when we speak. Those tones, those vibrations affect us and communicate to us in invisible ways because of the shapes, because of the symbols, because of the forms that these ways of communication take on. And books do that in the most literal way, but everything that we perceive happens through that kind of interaction. We see a form, or we experience a form. Maybe it's an audio or a scent. And those things affect us because of the timbre or the shade that we're experiencing, or the loudness or the bass. High-pitched sounds compared to low bass sounds affect us differently. And it's not because we can project meaning onto that, and we do. That's where what Lexi was talking about. How do we know when we're reading these things that they're affecting us, or how can we use these things to affect our consciousness, right? That's where conditioning comes into play. That's where dogma comes into play. That's where propaganda comes into play. That's where education comes into play. And so from my perspective as a teacher of the esoteric world, it's really about helping people understand how perception works, and that these symbols are tools that we can use. And I say this a lot to the students, use the tools, don't be the tool. You want to understand how to use these things, not be used by them. And we see people being used by propaganda all the time. We see people be conditioned. We're all conditioned in different ways. We all have different backgrounds. We all have different influences. But the more that we can be aware of these influences and understand how they affect us and understand how our perception works, the more we can respond to the information we're receiving as opposed to reacting to it.
I have a follow-up question to that, William. Since you know so much about sigils and symbols and all of these things, does a sigil or symbol have power over us if we don't know what it means or if we haven't drawn it ourselves? For instance, when I was new to this path, I was very proud and very outwardly sort of Wiccan looking. And so I went on Amazon to buy some really cool Wiccan sweatshirts to just let everyone know right away. And one of them, I was like, that one has cool symbols on it. After it hung in my closet for about a week, I was just like, I'm not liking the vibe here. I don't know why. I feel like a poser. I probably shouldn't wear that if I don't know what those things mean. Fast forward to some kind of group magical working. We're doing a 22 teachings, and somebody in some book included the demonic sigils instead of the angelic sigils. And I was like, oh, that's what was on my sweatshirt. Okay, I got rid of it. But would it have harmed me if I didn't know any better? I guess I just wonder about that.
Here's the thing. First of all, I'm one of these people that I don't think it's helpful to be superstitious, but that doesn't mean that things can't affect us, because, as I said, forms have shapes, and these shapes direct our consciousness. And you don't necessarily have to understand what something is in order for those shapes to take effect. But by that same token, we have to remember that these are just tools. I mean, when we think about it in terms of language, there's words that exist that we understand or maybe don't understand, but we don't have to let them affect us, although sometimes they do affect us. And so it really, again, comes into personal responsibility of understanding how am I being affected by what I'm perceiving in the world around me. Now, when you have information that maybe this shirt that I have has a demonic sigil on it, and you got that information, now you're confronted with some more questions. What is a demon? And what does it mean that I'm wearing it on a shirt, right? So now you've got more questions. And what I find is, especially with the demonic material, is a lot of times, I mean, part of the reason why that material is even made available on t-shirts goes back to what Diana was talking about, is this idea that's projected onto occultism, right? We have movies, we've got novels that kind of portray occultism as like the spooky voodoo, or you can get power if you use these things. And so people fall prey to that idea because, again, that's what they've been taught by watching movies or reading books, including authentic books, because there's books of magic that offer these things as well, right? But the thing to recall and to remember is that these things are created by humans, and humans have all different kinds of reasons for what they do, not always on the up and up. Which is why I think, especially if one is on the path of seeking wisdom, that it's important to understand yourself and understand how you operate, how you work, what your operating system is, how your consciousness works. Because do you want somebody else directing you? Do you want somebody else telling you what to think, what to feel, how to act? We can give some examples, right? Like witchcraft, for instance, was still is persecuted, but it was really persecuted in the past primarily by religious movements, not just Christianity, but a lot of the monotheistic religions are anti-witchcraft, anti-sorcery. And, in the West, in the church, they didn't want people reading the Bible. They didn't want people reading the words of heretics, who they consider to be heretical, because when you're reading these words, your consciousness is conforming to those shapes. You are literally having the thoughts of the heretics. That's why they wanted to burn books. That's why they wanted to burn heretics, because they were afraid that people were going to start thinking like the heretics, or afraid that they'd start thinking for themselves. Because let's be honest, a lot of the religions have controlled people through using their sacred texts and writings, interpretations of their sacred texts and writings, to manipulate political movements. We see a lot of that in dogmatic examples of religion. So, and when I make a distinction between religion and spirituality, right? You can be spiritual without having to go to church. So, it's a roundabout way, bringing it back to your question about the sigil. Can it affect you? It can affect you in a number of different ways. You can be totally ignorant of it and just think, this is cool. I want to convey to other people I'm into the occult. And so in that sense, you're using it as a tool. Your intention is, I want to tell people I'm interested in the occult. So there's a way that you're communicating, right? It's language again. But because you're ignorant of what it was, other people that might know what it is, or even not know what it is and still be afraid of it because it's a sigil. It doesn't even have to be demonic. People project onto angelic sigils and think they're demonic. So now you're in a situation where you're wearing something that other people are having reactions to, that you're encountering and maybe having to deal with that. So did the sigil do that? Well, yes. The shape of the sigil communicated to people. Did it communicate its true meaning? Well, again, that's another existential question, right? I brought that up earlier. What's a demon? Well, now what's truth? These are very difficult concepts to articulate, and these are part of the reason why we study the occult. But whether we understand or don't understand, there are effects to the fact that we understand or don't understand that are beyond our control sometimes when we're interacting with other people. And the more that we understand ourselves and understand how our consciousness works, the less we become enslaved to symbols, the less we become enslaved to language, the less we become enslaved to superstition. All right. So innately, no, I don't think those things could harm you, but there's potential for effects to happen in the world. Just like you could take the sigil out of it and just wear all black. Yesterday was International Goth Day, right? And
Sure
some
was.
people think that people that wear all black are bad people. Because again, it's symbolic. We're projecting onto things, ideas that we've been conditioned to believe. But in the occult path, it's important to get past the surface. We don't want to judge a book by its cover. We want to get deeper in and make our own determination, And there's people like me that teach, but at the end of the day, we have to learn ourselves, because I can tell you all kinds of things, and it's no different than reading a book. It's no different than hearing it from a politician or a teacher or a guy on the street, or a guru sitting in a cave on a mountaintop. I mean, this is information you're getting from outside of yourself. So the more you can understand your own consciousness, the easier it will be for you to navigate any kind of situation that you're dealing with, whether it's an occult one or real life, which in my opinion there's no difference.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And if it was only one demonic sigil, maybe I would have taken the time to research, but there were like 25 on there. There was no way I was going to be able to really understand all of them. And the reason I threw it out is I felt like a huge poser, and I was a little afraid of, summoning something by accident. Because as you said, we don't want to be superstitious, but sometimes things get a little weird. I don't know if you've ever seen The Ninth Gate? It's a movie about, okay. So I think it's Johnny Depp or somebody, and he's got a rare and occult bookshop, and it's in the 90s or early 2000s. And somebody is, I don't know, there's a woman who's flying downstairs trying to get a book, and something's evil and somebody's evil. Have you ever encountered a book project or a book or a manuscript that maybe seemed a little cursed?
Yes. The very first book I published had a reputation for being a cursed book. It was a 10th century Arabic book of magic called the Teachings. And it was a book I wanted to read because it was mentioned in a lot of historical texts that I was reading. And, I've done a lot of reading in the history of the occult world. And part of the reason why I was reading the histories was because of my involvement in the occult world. And I wanted to know the origins. I wanted to understand where do these ideas come from? How did these ideas develop? And I think it's really important to understand where ideas come from, and both historically speaking, but also our own thoughts. It's the same thing. Going back to the source, where do our impulses come from? And so I had heard about this book, and I was at the time apprenticing as a bookbinder, and I was already doing research in libraries and pulling this kind of rare material out. And so my bookbinder teacher was asking, he'd always say, well, when are you going to publish a book? And I wasn't really ready. I was 18, 19. And I just kept saying, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. I'm not ready. He's like, well, you're pulling all these manuscripts out of the libraries and the museums. I mean, you're ready, And so one day he would always ask me, and one day he finally asked, and I said, well, if I was going to do it, I would do the Teachings. And he said, well, did you know I have an Arabic copy? And the Arabic's the earliest version. So I set out to translate that book. And when I started to embark upon that journey, I had a lot to learn, because I had never published before, never worked with translators before. So a lot to learn. But I learned from people, when people would hear I was working on it, they would say, aren't you afraid of the curse? And I just, I heard that from a couple of people in Seattle where I lived. And I kind of took it with a grain of salt, because people are always talking about stuff. And particularly one of my elders was one of the ones that said this to me. But he also likes to tell stories and embellish stories, usually with some kind of, a point to his stories. So I took it with a big grain of salt. But the more I worked on it, the more I would encounter strangers who I didn't know from other cities that would ask me the same thing. And I had never heard that there was a curse on this book, but I was starting to hear it over and over and over again. And when people say, well, aren't you worried about the curse? My response would be, no, I don't worry about curses. Because I'm not a superstitious person. I don't worry that I'm going to break my mother's back by stepping on a crack. that doesn't mean that there aren't dark forces in the world. That doesn't mean that there aren't dangerous things that can happen to us. And, intentions can be very palpable. We've all experienced that time where we walk into a room where maybe there was an argument before, and we weren't there for the argument, but we can feel the tension in the air. And that book Thought Forms really gets into that, right? This idea that there's sort of a numinousness to consciousness, an astral or etheric atmosphere around thoughts, around intentions. And we can feel it from people when people smile at us on the street, or give us a wink, or whatever. There's subtle ways that we experience these things. So in the case of the curse, I took it to be more of a folk tale. I took it to be more of a just a warning. And here's the thing: where does this idea of this book being cursed come from? It's not in the book itself. It doesn't say in this book, in the book, if you read this book, you're cursed. So somebody else made the idea that this book was cursed. And very likely it was a religious person that was afraid because it was an occult book. And they were like, oh, don't get involved with that. You'll get cursed. This whole idea of cursing and hexing, again, it's been popularized by the media and by movies. And that, again, it's not to say that people don't do it. They do. But I find it to be very immature. I think that, when you're on a spiritual path, the idea of cursing or hexing somebody you're kind of off on the wrong foot there, in my opinion. Yoga, the word yoga literally means union. So we're trying to become whole. We're trying to become unified. And as a society, I think that we need to be concentrating on concord and humanity instead of dividing ourselves in all these different ways. And curses and hexes are ways in which people try to scare people away from certain ideas. Don't go there. It's a bad idea. It's good to be careful. It's good to be cautious. It's good to protect yourself. I mean, we put on a raincoat before we go into rainstorms. When we climb mountains, we use ropes and safety equipment. We put our seatbelts on when we get in the car. And you want to do the same mentally and emotionally when you're dealing with the world, because we don't know who we're dealing with out there. But we don't put our seatbelts on because we're superstitious that we're going to get in an accident. We're doing it because there's the potential for that. So yeah, the cursed book thing, I had to raise my eyebrow once or twice, but, I was just like, well, this is one of the situations where, as a magician, I'm going to show you that a curse isn't really going to be something I need to be worried about. I didn't find that there was anything valid about it just because it had that reputation.
So, talking about the perception of the occult and other matters related to that, do you feel like censorship is potentially strong at the moment for these kinds of publications or knowledge?
Yeah, I think censorship is. This is nothing new, right? We mentioned it before. The church didn't want these kinds of things being read, and I think a lot of that stems from fear and the desire for control over people. Fear for things they don't understand, and that idea of control, because they want to control people, and manipulate what people think and feel. But there's another issue related to this, and I think we were through email kind of talking about it through some of the questions you asked about expressing ideas in this environment of censorship, right? This idea of what do I think about communicating, especially about the esoteric world or the occult world, and my feeling is we're very fortunate that we're able to do that right now, but I'm not sure it's necessarily the best thing to stand on a soapbox and shout it out with a megaphone. And the reason is, even though these subjects are very popular right now, witchcraft, tarot, divination, all these things, they're all very popular and rising in popularity. They are still heretical in the eyes of orthodoxy, and they always will be. And to think that that's going to change anytime soon is, I think, a little short-sighted. The popularity feels like, oh, everybody's doing it. It's like Harry Potter came out, before that Da Vinci Code. They're, again, like movies and novels popularize things, but they don't necessarily bring understanding. And since the understanding isn't there, you're dealing with ignorance, and ignorance carries along with it fear. And so you can put yourself in danger by being a megaphone. And I think there's a time and a place to communicate these ideas. But I feel that it's important personally, my style, I can't get away from it because I'm an occult publisher. So I'm already on the map. People already project onto me. When that movie that you mentioned, The Ninth Gate, based on a novel called Club Dumas, when that came out, people would come to me and they go, they made a movie about you, because I'm an occult bookseller, and so was Johnny Depp in the movie, even though the character that Johnny Depp portrays, I'm nothing like that. So I was a little offended when people were saying they made a movie about you, which just sort of underscores how easy it is for people to understand and not get what the information that's being conveyed is about. And so we see a lot of politics being used by the esoteric world. And sometimes this is good because, again, we're talking about symbol systems, and they are types of languages. It's a way of communicating. We see like for instance, witchcraft and feminism have really come together in this day and age. Pam Grossman's podcast, The Witch Wave. I think it's done a lot of positive things in that regard. Or like the Satanic Temple. They've done a lot of political work that is interesting and effective, utilizing these esoteric themes. But personally, I think that for myself, even though I'm a public person and it's clear that I'm a magician and that I study these things, when I try to communicate with them, I try to communicate with people about them in a way that they can understand as a human being, instead of like, well, I'm an initiate of whatever degree, and you'll never understand because you haven't gone through these ceremonies, and the claptrap, the superstitious stuff that people tend to, embellish themselves with. And I think that it's important for us to be able to communicate as human beings to anyone, especially if it comes to helping them understand themselves and the universe better. And that's not to say that I want to pull the mysticism out of the occult world, because I love the mystery and the mysticism. But it's important to know that these are tools. They shouldn't be bonds. They shouldn't be chains that we're locked into. And if we're using them to come into conflict with people, I don't think that's good. Like in the case of feminism and witchcraft and feminism are being used together to create harmonious experiences, as opposed to using witchcraft to like hex the patriarchy or whatever, which again, that can be useful in a certain context. But you want to be careful because you don't know who you're dealing with out there. The only person that we have any control over is ourselves, and we can shout on the tops of the mountaintops what we think is right. But if the other people disagree or don't understand, we could be putting ourselves or others in danger. So I think that when we're communicating with people that are outside of studying these things, it's important to use language that they can relate to and understand. It's not important for them to know the difference between, the philosopher's stone and the microcosm. We can state things in a more humanistic way and still arrive at a harmonious communication. It's not for everyone. That's why it's the occult. It's hidden for a reason. It's hidden because most people don't understand. So, yeah, censorship is going to happen. If we're not blowing our mega horns, probably won't get censored because, it's such a small movement, even though it's popular, that you're practically invisible if you're not trying to get in the spotlight.
It can be fun too. I would say for me, a lot of the draw was detective work. I love rabbit holes. I love research. I love puzzles. So any excuse to research one subject, which leads to another subject, which leads to an older author, which leads to maybe something that is written in code, or it's a cipher and there's one person who solved it, or there's no way to solve it, or who knows, you could do it wrong, but then it's also right. The sort of the brain teases and the fact that it is like a mind F every single time. And I love it so much. Like, I want my brain fried by my esoteric books. I love nothing more. So if you're sort of an armchair magician doing your puzzles and your ciphers and your research, I think that you are relatively safe. It's just interesting because in the sort of space that our podcast is in, there's a lot of people who do, one card tarot readings, and they'll send you an Instagram message, dear one, grand rising to you. I saw your picture and loved the energy coming off you. Please send $75 and I will give you a reading. And it's like, no, thanks. I'm good. Or, do you need to hire a psychic? It's like, no, I'm good. I'm good there too. So there is a lot of saturation. I think that social media is extremely saturated, not only with the very few legit people, but also with people who are just trying to make a buck. And I think if you're just starting out, perhaps you might not have developed your discretion to the point of being able to tell who's who right away.
Yeah. And, Hermetic Qabalah, one of the very first spheres or states that you study is called Malkuth, the kingdom. And it relates to the world. And one of the lessons of Malkuth is discrimination. And the true meaning of discrimination, not prejudice, but the power of discerning the difference between things. And the reason why that's one of the first things you study is because we want to be able to understand, well, if somebody says they're putting a curse on me, what does that mean? Or if somebody says they pulled a card and and an ancestor wants to tell me something, what does that mean? and being able to discern whether or not that's something to explore. And I think that John Oliver interviewed the Dalai Lama once, and he brought up a really great question. He said, I heard that you have an oracle that you consult. And the Dalai Lama said, yes, I do. And he said, well, so you make your decisions based on the words of an oracle, some like spirit that comes through a person? And the Dalai Lama said, no, I don't make my decisions based on that. I consult an oracle along with my advisors and my own thoughts, and then I make a determination based on these different sources of information. And so, when we're dealing with these things, it's important to be able to make these distinctions and understand how the different parts of our consciousness are being affected by the information that we're receiving and how we're reacting to it. And a lot of people don't realize that this happens unconsciously, but you can realize it consciously if you understand how your consciousness works, if you understand how your perception works. And that's, for me, that's part of the whole point of teaching and studying these things. People used to come to me and they'd say, will you give me a tarot reading? And I said, no, but I'll teach you how to read for yourself. Because we're all teachers. We're all students. I learn from my students just as much as my students learn from me. There's no better way to learn than to teach, in my opinion. I think that's a great point, Lexi. Absolutely.
Are you writing anything yourself these days?
Am I writing anything? Yeah, I'm writing a lot of coursework. I'm writing classes for 22 teachings. There's always writing going on. I have a couple of books that are slowly developing. I work on lots of projects all the time. I have a lot of creative energy, and I just sort of do these things when I'm in the mood, and I work on them until they get to a point where it's like, okay, now I can push it to the end. I have some things that I'm writing that I've been writing over the years, but none of my personal books are ready to be published. I am working on some stuff for Ouroboros, some classic stuff. Most of my personal writing just goes into the coursework that I'm creating for 22 teachings. Yeah.
Can you tell us about any?
I've been doing a lot of visual stuff lately too.
Oh my God, yes. William is an amazing artist. Do you have anything behind you or next to you? Any of your sketches?
Well, I have some diagrams that I've been creating, and a lot of these diagrams have been coming out of the teaching activities that I do at the school. So I've been creating things like this.
Here, move it over just a little. It's beautiful.
That's cool. Tell us.
I'll show you a couple items.
Oh. Huh.
Is that a jellyfish? Is it?
Which part are we talking about?
Well, there's like a bulb with tentacles.
These are alchemical vessels.
Okay. I was going to say, I saw that jellyfish.
This is the what's called an athanor. It's an alchemical oven, and there's two vessels in a vat of water on the top, and it's being heated up.
Ooh.
You've got the same style.
Here's another one.
It's beautiful.
Oh, wow.
Huh.
So these are influenced by Renaissance engravings and emblems, alchemical emblems. So I've been doing a lot of illustrations like that. A lot of times, the handouts for my courses employ images like this. And again, they're the old saying, an image is worth 1,000 words. And that's one of the reasons why I think symbol studies are so important, because they do represent a number of different things according to context, right? The symbols are modular, just like language, just like the letters or words of our language. We can switch them around and they have different kinds of meanings based on the context. So if you're interested in ciphers, if you're interested in mysteries, and you're interested in penetrating deeper into the meanings of these mysterious things that we see in these texts, I recommend getting a dictionary of symbols. And one of the best ones that I can recommend is called the Penguin Dictionary of Symbols.
Okay.
It's pretty common. You can find that book. It's a very in-depth book. Now, there's not a lot of images in it. It's words that you look up, like the color green or rose or clouds or mountain. And it'll give you the symbolism from different cultures of what that symbol has represented. And again, these are not hard and fast ideas. These are things that we have attributed to these symbols as humans because we see them or experience them. And they're deliberate. Some of them have lots of different symbolism behind them, meaning behind them. And it's because they're able to plug into different things again in the context. So the more you study symbols, the more you begin to understand and unpack what the mysterious symbols that you see in occult books are about. You can study geometry and numerology, and you'll start to understand the meanings that are in a lot of these things. The tarot is another great way, right? It's filled with symbols. But there's this structure to the tarot that a lot of people don't realize, that it follows the Hermetic Qabalah system. And it's you don't need to know Hermetic Qabalah in order to use tarot cards. But if you do know the system of Hermetic Qabalah, it really opens it up as a deeper tool for self-understanding. And then I'll share one other piece of artwork. This is not art I did. This is a wood engraving for a book that I'm going to be publishing, the next Ouroboros Press book. This is a wood engraving of Johann Valentine Andre, who was the author of The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz, which is a Rosicrucian allegorical novel. So, but this was hand cut in wood and then printed by Dexter Brightman, who's an amazing woodcut artist. So that's coming out. That'll be
Beautiful.
The next Ouroboros Press.
That's a gorgeous. That is a wood carving. It looks like a pencil sketch. It's so detailed.
Yeah, he's really quite amazing, and his style does reflect that Renaissance era style very closely. It's pretty amazing. So he did 7 or 8 illustrations that way for the book, and it's going to be a beautiful edition.
Well, how can people sign up for your courses, get to know you better? What else do you offer in this sort of deeper mystery understanding?
Well, yeah, if you want to take classes that I teach, I primarily teach through 22teachings.com. And the main school is in Los Angeles, but there's a lot of hybrid classes, so we're also online, and you can tune in through Zoom for several of those. And then the publishing company is Ouroboros Press, and the website is bookarts.org. And, my email's on there. You can contact me through there. My students know that they can always reach out to me if they have questions. I'm always happy to communicate about those things, because there's always more, and the conversations can just go on and on. It's fun. So yeah, and I'm living in Seattle right now, but I'm actually in the process of packing up and getting ready to move down to Los Angeles. So to be closer to the school and hopefully get to see my students in person more often.
It's fortunate for them. So we're just brushing the surface here.
I mean, barely. We maybe touched a toe on the surface. But I think it was a pretty incredible conversation, and our listeners will be really grateful to hear what you have to say, William. And I always appreciate how you're able to relay information in a way that's not only sort of academic, but also human, just person to person. Here's what it is. And it's very much appreciated. And we just appreciate your time so much today. Thank you.
Thank you. It's lovely talking with you, and I love your questions.
Thank you. I didn't even know there was a difference between demon sigils and angelic sigils. So now I'm dying to learn more.
Yeah. I didn't know when I bought the sweatshirt.
Yeah. Well, I do. There is a class for sigils on the 22 Teachings site. It's one of my favorite classes, actually.
Have to check it out.
It's a good one. It's a recording. I actually think that's how I took that class of yours, was by buying the recording. It's just as potent. And plus, you can go back and rewind if you need to update your notes. So.
Right. Or learn slowly like I do. So cool. Thank you so much, William. I really enjoyed this. I'm so appreciative that Lexi suggested it, and I'm super curious to learn more. I'm sure our listeners will too.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Word for our sponsors, Oweli Supplements and CBD Pure, both whom have generously offered to give you 15% off using the SoulFam podcast coupon code SoulFam, SOULFAM, and free shipping. And trust me, when you're ordering stuff like this, it actually really adds up. You can save quite a bit of money, several dollars for every order. Both Lexi and I have worked with these products and their companies, and we have firsthand experience, and we really like these companies, sincerely. Oweli, OWELI.com, is a supplement company that uses natural ingredients based on ancient knowledge coupled with modern science, which sounds a lot like the SoulFam podcast. I am a huge supplement person. I take multiple supplements each day. The quality of Oweli supplements is high and effective, in my opinion. I take Move for joint health because I work out almost every day. I do yoga, I walk, I hike, I ride horses. And secondly, I mix collagen, peptides, hydrolyzed protein for a protein shake every day so I can be sure to get the right amount of protein in my body every day. And for women, I personally feel that's super important. CBD Pure, www.cbdpure.com, is made with non-GMO hemp grown without herbicides, pesticides, and other dangerous chemicals. Both Lexi and I feel like this is a stellar product. I use the CBD Pure 500 cream for pain in my neck from texting and working at a computer and a car accident I was in. Lexi uses CBD Pure Pet Health to help some of her posse of rescued cats who show up at her doorstep. They often have joint issues and other movement issues, and this product really seems to help Lexi's cats. Both products work superbly. No harmful side effects, at least from our experience. So once again, we thank our sponsors, CBD Pure and Oweli Supplements. We'll post links to both product lines on our Instagrams on my link tree and on YouTube and on our upcoming website, Patreon. Just remember the code for 15% off with free shipping, which once again adds up to a lot, is SoulFam, SOULFAM. That's SoulFam for our SoulFam.